This week's Torah portion, Jethro, in chapter 19, the narrative brings the people of Israel to Mount Sinai, and we get to a very important part of Scripture. The nation of Israel entering into covenant with God, in what is sometimes called the Mosaic covenant, since it was mediated by Moses. God said this to Israel, "Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." If Israel were to obey God's commandments, Israel would be his special people and would receive the blessings promised to them in the covenant God made with Abraham. And to this Israel responded, saying, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do." But what are God's commandments that Israel obligated themselves to obey? They are all the commandments that God spoke through Moses to the people, the most popular of which are the 10 Commandments, which are firstly found in Exodus chapter 20. In Judaism, the 10 Commandments are actually called the 10 Words, and this is because they are the words that God spoke directly to Israel. As it says in Exodus chapter 20, verse 1, "Then God spoke all these words, saying..." So the 10 Commandments represent and in a way summarize Israel's covenant obligation to God. Firstly, God said, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." In Christianity, we don't tend to think of this as the first commandment, but this is how the Jewish people reckon it. The first commandment is to recognize that the Lord is God, the one who brought Israel out of Egypt. For Israel, this was important because they believed that other gods existed. And while some no doubt held true to their traditions, likely most of the Israelites were heavily influenced by Egyptian culture. So before God could expect them to obey any of his commandments, they had to first recognize him as their God, the one who had just delivered them out of slavery in Egypt. And the same is true for us. Without first recognizing the one true God of Israel and recognizing that he has graciously saved us from sin and death, there is really no point in living the life that he wants us to live. And this order of things, firstly recognizing God and his grace before endeavoring to obey his commandments, is actually how Paul described things in Ephesians. He said, "For by grace you have been saved through faith," then he said, "created in Messiah Jesus for good works." Secondly, God said, "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol." And after establishing that the Lord is God, it was important for God to communicate that he expected Israel to have no other gods and to especially not make any idols representing those gods. Idolatry remained a problem for Israel for hundreds of years. But for us today, thankfully, most people don't actually believe in multiple gods, but we are still influenced by idolatrous tendencies. Whether it's accepting the idea that all the gods of all the religions are all the same and they all lead to the same place, or maybe it's putting other areas of interest before God, the fact is we too have to ensure that God is our first and, in a sense, our only priority. As the Apostle John said, "Guard yourselves from idols." Thirdly, God said, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain." And while it's inappropriate to include God in common expressions like, "Oh my God," and so on, this is actually not what the commandment is prohibiting. This is a commandment against invoking God's name in things like vows or oaths or contracts, especially if you don't intend to keep those things. For example, if you say, "May God strike me down if I don't do such and such," why would you say such a thing and include God? Well, it's because you want to indicate that you are serious about keeping your end of the deal. However, if you are not actually intending to keep your promises, then it's as if God is saying, "Don't drag me into this and ruin my reputation as well." Sadly, invoking God's name in false vows had become so common by the time of Jesus that he said this, "I say to you, make no oath at all, but let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no." As disciples of Jesus, we need to be people of such decisive action that we don't even really need to make promises. Fourthly, God said, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work. And according to this commandment, the people of Israel are to remember the Sabbath, to keep it holy. But what does it mean to keep the Sabbath holy? Well, it means to treat it as a day that is different from the other days of the week. From Sunday to Friday, God expects his people to get all of the work done that they want to do. But once the sun sets on Friday night, they were to no longer engage in creative work. So the Sabbath is the day of the week that is especially reserved to focus on God and on family. And according to Jewish tradition and according to the apostles, the Sabbath is a picture of the Messianic kingdom. Let's think about this. That you have God's permission to take one whole day off and to rest from all of your worries. Each week you can leave this age behind and enter into kingdom life. And the commandment to remember the Sabbath is applicable in some way for all Christians today. As it says in Hebrews, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. Fifthly, God said, honor your father and your mother. But what does it mean to honor your parents? Well, according to Jewish interpretation, at least a part of honoring your parents means to take care of them when they are older. You see, God was building a society for Israel, and taking care of the elderly is an important part in building a peaceful and godly society. And as history has shown us, top-down central planning doesn't really work. The idea that the government will take care of us is not only immoral, but it's also ineffective. The responsibility to take care of the elderly must fall on each family and on the local community. Each family and each community is to take care of their own. And of course, it's so much easier to honor those who are honorable. It might be a little selfish, but one of the reasons why you should treat your kids well is that they might one day need to take care of you. As Paul said to parents, do not provoke your children to anger. Instead, raise them up properly so that they will be able to take care of you when you are older. Sixthly, God said, you shall not murder. And to murder someone is to kill them without their consent. The Bible teaches that we are created in God's image and that we are to rule over the earth, but not over each other. Each person has a right to their own life, and no one else has the right to another person's life. And no one has the right to take another person's life. Now, to most people, murder is an obviously horrific thing, and it's rightly condemned. But some of those same people might not be conscious of the realities of war. However, the veterans among us know all too well the horrors of war, that war is essentially murder on a massive scale, and it's usually for the sake of psychopathic leaders who simply want more land or power. Now, waging war in defense is a whole different matter, but supporting wars in which we invade other countries who have not attacked us first is essentially the same as condoning mass murder. As followers of Jesus, we must be against all aggressive wars. As Jesus said, all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. Seventhly, God said, you shall not commit adultery. Again, these commandments are in place because God wanted to build a peaceful and godly society. The foundation of healthy families is a healthy marriage between a man and a woman. Therefore, engaging in extramarital affairs is strictly forbidden. When a couple gets married, they vow to stay faithful to each other, and they do so in the sight of God. To break the marriage covenant is to admit that you don't care about God or his ways. And furthermore, the breaking up of a marriage has an incredibly negative effect on the children. There is so much pain, heartache, and sorrow that comes as a result of adultery. Adultery comes from a place of selfishness, the bad kind of selfishness when you put yourself above everyone else despite your promises. The Apostle Peter said that those who commit adultery are stains and blemishes. And God's people are not to be like that. We are supposed to be set apart from the world. Out of all the people in the world, we are supposed to be demonstrating what it means to be faithful to your spouse. And as we demonstrate this faithfulness, we are demonstrating God's own faithfulness to us. Eighthly, God said, you shall not steal. And from this commandment and from other passages, the Bible clearly teaches that we each have the right to own property. The right to own property is simply an extension of our right to life. Property is simply the result of taking our time, energy, skill, and so on, and then applying it to the world. So for someone to take without your permission the property that you've produced, it's as if they are stealing away a part of you. They're stealing away from you all of that time, energy, and skill that you put into producing that property. So theft is really personal. It's taking away a part of your life. And the book of Revelation teaches that theft is one of the sins that characterize those who are unrepentant. Ninthly, God said, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." And this commandment is sometimes thought of as a simple prohibition against lying, but as bad as that is, this commandment is actually referring to not giving false testimony in a dispute, like in a court case. So once again, God was building for Israel a peaceful and godly society. But to have that kind of society, there would have to be justice. And justice can only be found when the truth is told. And we thank God that in our society, we take this commandment seriously. So much so that in a court, a person testifying has to place their hand on a Bible and swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And Jesus taught that those who bear false witness are simply expressing the evil that is in their heart. And lastly, God said, "You shall not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor." The last of the 10 Commandments does not prohibit seeing what others have and then being inspired to also have what they have by working harder, but rather it prohibits jealously desiring what others have and cultivating a desire to steal what they have. And this commandment is unique among the 10 Commandments because it speaks to what goes on in our heart. In Judaism and in the teachings of Jesus, there is what is called fence commandments. A fence commandment is a commandment that is supposed to guard another more important or grievous commandment. And Jesus demonstrated in his teachings that the best fence commandments are those that get to the heart of the matter. If we first deal with our hearts, we will then have a better chance of not going out and breaking God's commandments with our actions. For example, Jesus taught that we shouldn't lust after women, lest we then be tempted to commit adultery. The commandment against coveting helps us to not even allow ourselves to get to a place where we will break the other commandments with our actions. So these are the 10 Commandments. But let's not forget that the 10 Commandments simply represent Israel's obligation. According to the ancient rabbis, there are actually 603 more commandments that Israel must obey in order to fulfill their part of the covenant God made with them. May we all devote our lives to studying and then living them out.